on Anaesthesia TV. Okay. Thank you. I tell them now we will start with the first case presentation, which is going to be presented by Dr. Swapnal Ugale, and the moderator is Dr. Rajashree Godbole. Share screen.
पहिलेच ठेवा.
फर्स्ट वाला कर दो रे, चला जाएगा. उनको पढ़ने में प्रॉब्लम आएगा. छोटा करो. यस. और नीचे करो तो उनको सब सेंटेंस को पढ़ते हैं. चल. वेलकम स्वप्ना.
Yes. Good evening, everybody. Today, myself and Swapna are presenting from bronchoscopic removal of an unusual foreign body in trachea. This was a case done by both of us in April. Removal of airway foreign body is a very challenging case, both for the bronchoscopist as well as for the anesthesiologist. It's a very dynamic operation with the dynamically moving foreign bodies. There are many controversies in this procedure, like which bronchoscope is to be used, rigid or flexible, what type of ventilation we should use, jet ventilation or IPPR, and this procedure should be done with spontaneous respiration or with muscle relaxation. We don't want to go into any controversies. Everyone has his or her own choice of anesthesia according to the availability of the instruments. So we are going to present today's case the way we routinely do in our setup. So I will tell now Swapnal to start the case. Swapnal, please start.
Yes, ma'am. Very good evening to everyone. So starting with the presentation. It was 3 years old female child brought by parents at pediatric emergency department with following chief complaints. She was having cough since 12 to 13 days, vomiting of blood 3 episodes since 1 day. The child was apparently alright 12 to 13 days back when she developed dry cough associated with abnormal sounds from throat and rapid breathing. She also had 3 episodes of vomiting with blood since 1 day. She was referred to KEM Hospital Pune for further management by their family doctor. On general examination, child was conscious and obeying commands. Her weight was 10.6 kg. She was slightly breathless with audible wheeze, and she was having tachypnea with respiratory rate of 35 per minute. Her pulse was regular, 120 per minute, and blood pressure was 90 by 60 millimeters of mercury. Her saturation on room air was 92%. Cardiac sounds were normal, and on respiratory system examination, air entry was bilateral equal, but she was having bilateral wheeze. Her routine blood investigations within normal limit. So in this slide, neck X-ray lateral view, here is the foreign body. And this is the AP view of chest X-ray. You can see the foreign body here just above the carina. So we planned her for rigid bronchoscopy under general anesthesia. Written informed consent given by parents and nil by mouth status was confirmed. We secured 24-gauge intracath on her left hand and monitored her with saturation with 2 pulse oximeters, non-invasive BP, ECG, temperature, and precordial stethoscope throughout the procedure. We pre-medicated the child with injection dexamethasone 2 mg IV, ondansetron 1 mg IV, and glycopyrrolate 40 mg IV. Given antibiotic augmentin 300 mg IV, and then induced with injection fentanyl 20 microgram IV, propofol 20 mg IV, and succinylcholine 20 mg IV. Then bag and mask ventilation given with the 100% oxygen, and we handed over the patient to surgeon. Then during bronchoscopy, we ventilated her with Sanders injector. When surgeon removed the first small piece of the glass, at that particular time, We gave her injection atracurium 5 mg IV in view of anticipation of prolonged procedure and to keep the child completely immobile as it was a sharp foreign body, so to avoid any further trauma to her airway. After foreign body retrieval, we ventilated her again with bag and mask and 100% oxygen. We did check laryngoscopy to see whether there is any piece of foreign body remained in the mouth, and then did thorough oral suction. Then reverse her with injection neostigmine 0.5 mg and injection glycopyrrolate 0.1 mg IV. Then given paracetamol 150 mg IV for analgesia, and fluid was given DNS 50 cc. In post-operative period, we shifted her to recovery room in lateral position, nebulized with Budecort, and shifted to PICU for observation, kept her indoor for another 2 days, and then discharged her when she was completely well. So in this slide, you can see this is the first small piece of foreign body which could be retrieved by the surgeon. And this is the second piece, the large piece of glass. It is the Sanders injector used for ventilation, and this is 2-stage regulator.
Okay, now we will start with questions. What are the anesthetic challenges in bronchoscopy?
Ma'am, mostly it is the emergency procedure. It is life-threatening. Many of the times, pediatric patients are there which are not nil by mouth all the time. Patients may be in respiratory distress depending upon how much the obstruction of the airway is there. Proper history may or may not be available if no one has viewed the child when he was ingesting the foreign body. Bronchoscopy is itself in a high-risk procedure. We are sharing airway with the surgeon, and specialized equipments are necessary.
What are the types of bronchoscopies we can do?
Ma'am, there are rigid and fiber optic bronchoscopies. Rigid bronchoscopy is gold standard for foreign body removal. Expert surgeon as well as anesthesiologist is must for this procedure, and good communication should be there throughout the procedure. Suitable method of anesthesia and ventilation is required to reduce any complications, morbidity or mortality. In this slide, I have highlighted few points. The differences between rigid and flexible bronchoscopy. So rigid is comparatively more invasive and flexible is less invasive procedure. Rigid bronchoscopy always requires general anesthesia, but flexible can be done under local anesthesia, mostly in adults with use of lignocaine spray. Rigid is more traumatic and flexible is comparatively less traumatic. Rigid can be used for diagnostic plus therapeutic purposes. Flexible is mostly diagnosis. It can be used for therapeutic purposes also if very specific instruments are available. In rigid bronchoscopy, to see the peripheral foreign body is not possible, but with flexible, yes, it is easily seen and retrieval is also possible. With rigid bronchoscopy, suctioning and instrumentation is comparatively easy, but with flexible, it is not. In rigid bronchoscopy, ventilation is easy, but with flexible, it is not that much easy.
So, what are the common age? What is the common age group you come across in such cases?
Mostly the patients are below 5 years of age, and in that also 6 months to 3 years are very common. And it is more common in the males because of their physical overactivity.
What is the etiology of airway foreign bodies?
The relatively high position of larynx and epiglottis in children, their narrow airways, incomplete development of protective reflexes, and right lower bronchus is more prone because of its a more vertical and wider anatomy. And also during playing, children lose their concentration and they have a tendency to put all the objects into their mouth.
What are the common foreign bodies you come across?
Ma'am, the organic foreign bodies into that nuts, seeds, legumes, and inorganic foreign bodies like plastic or metallic parts of the toys, pen caps, pins, or small button cells. And pathophysiology is organic foreign bodies lead to chemoinflammatory reaction, and then child will present with fever and pneumonia. If it is starchy seed, legumes, then it will get swell up and partial obstruction becomes complete and it will be life-threatening emergency. If it is sharp-tipped foreign body, then it may cause the perforation of the airways.
What are the symptoms of airway foreign bodies?
A child can be presented with the asymptomatic to severe respiratory distress like picture. Commonly, in immediate scenario, there could be sudden coughing, dyspnea, wheezing, expiratory stridor and cyanosis. And if it is delayed, then persistent coughing, audible bronchi, and repetitive pneumonia. The foreign body, if it is present in trachea, then there will be clinical triad of asthmatoid wheeze, audible slap from rough trachea, and palpable third. And if it is endobronchial foreign body, then penetration syndrome like choking, intractable coughing, followed by vomiting.
How do you diagnose airway foreign bodies?
Ma'am, detailed history elicitation from the parents or caretaker and physical examination of child thoroughly is very, very important. Chest X-ray is the only fastest available investigation. CT scan is more useful only in radiolucent foreign body. On chest X-ray, foreign bodies are not radio opaque most of the times. If metallic, then it can be seen. If there is distal airway obstruction, then emphysema or infiltration like picture is there. And if they consult to doctor in delayed time, then consolidation can be developed in the lungs. So airway foreign body should be considered as differential diagnosis in unexplained cough in young children. So the prompt intervention to minimize the long-term complications is of utmost importance.
Tell us about the anesthetic considerations of airway foreign bodies.
Ma'am, patient should be quiet during induction to avoid displacement of the foreign body. Pre-oxygenation with 100% oxygen is very important because they are having very low FRC. No sedative pre-medication to be given to maintain respiration, and all short-acting anesthetic drugs to be used so that post-procedure child will be completely conscious with all the intact reflexes like coughing and all. So the deep level of anesthesia and analgesia during procedure is must, but at the end, patient should be completely awake. Steroids like dexamethasone 0.4 to 1 milligram per kg for treatment of any inflammation or airway edema, antibiotic cover to avoid pneumonia, jet ventilation or intermittent positive pressure respiration during bronchoscopy avoids hypoxia and atelectasis, and neuromuscular blockade is important to suppress patient's mobility and reflexes to avoid airway trauma, coughing, and surgeon can also work very comfortably.
What is the anesthetic management of airway foreign bodies?
Ma'am, inform high-risk consent to be taken before procedure. ICU and ventilator booking should be there. Intravenous line to be preferably taken before induction, and child should be monitored for ECG, saturation, BP, temperature, and precordial stethoscope. Induction, IV anesthetics can be used of propofol, ketamine, or etomidate depending upon the condition of child. Short-acting opioids like fentanyl or remifentanil can be used. Neuromuscular blocking agents, after confirming the ventilation, either succinylcholine or non-depolarizing agent can be given. Bag and mask ventilation with the 100% oxygen till we give the hand over the child to surgeon. Vocal cords can be sprayed with the local anesthetics like lignocaine spray. Jet ventilation or intermittent positive pressure respiration using JR circuit during bronchoscopy to keep ventilation. Analgesics like paracetamol or diclofenac, and postoperatively either intubation or ventilation with bag and mask till the patient come out of the relaxant effect if required.
Tell us about the postoperative care of such patients.
Ma'am, in postoperative period, close observation of the child is very important. Any comfortable position, preferably lateral position, to be given to the child. Antibiotic cover for the pneumonia, and nebulization with steroids or Diolin for airway irritation, cough, or bronchospasm, and then discharge according to the patient's condition.
What are the complications of airway foreign bodies as well as bronchoscopic procedures?
Ma'am, it could be minor complications like arterial desaturation, bradycardia, bronchospasm, or may lead to the major complications like laryngeal edema, pneumothorax, or even cardiac arrest can happen. And in delayed period, pneumonia, lung abscess, bronchiectasis, or bronchial stricture. And if the foreign bodies are sharp, like in our case, then mucosal erosion, penetrating injury, and hemoptysis can occur. Thank you.
Okay, now the case.
Now the case is open for discussion. If you have any questions, you may ask. Does anybody have any questions about this?
Hello, Rajashree.
Yes,
Hello.
madam. Good evening, madam.
Good evening. And good evening, Bhatia sir also. Good evening.
Good evening, madam.
Good evening. Rajashree, there was
madam.
Madam, we can't hear you.
I'm unmuted myself.
Now we can hear you. Yeah.
Yeah. See, actually, there was a discussion on this ventilation during bronchoscopy. So it's Pradnya's opinion that we should not use this Sanders technique. Instead of that, now newer bronchoscopes are there, which are ventilating bronchoscopes. So they would be ideal to prevent the pneumothorax and all. So actually, I'm quite conversant with this technique, what you said. I really felt that I was in KEM, Rajashree.
Yes.
So it was
Yes, madam. We are also very conversant. We are using it, even though people say ki it should not be used. But the other bronchoscopes with which we can use JR circuit and IPPR should be available with us.
All
That's
the sizes should be available,
Yes.
madam. Then only we
Then
can
only we
practice
can
it,
use it.
not otherwise.
no. Nowadays, surgeons carry the ventilating bronchoscope. So
Yes.
they prefer ventilation with the TPs, I mean the side arm of that thing.
Correct, correct.
And this was really a dangerous foreign body. Huh? I mean,
Yes,
with the
madam.
classes, yeah.
It
Tell
was
it.
a very
Yes,
dangerous
manage.
foreign body, and the baby was every time the baby was coughing, the baby was throwing blood out with the
Oh my
sputum.
goodness. So
Yes.
there was a, actually I missed the beginning part of it. Where was it exactly? The foreign body?
Madam, it was above the carina.
Oh my goodness. So,
Yes. And it was stuck to the posterior wall of the trachea. When the surgeon put the bronchoscope in, he just could not see anything inside because the foreign body was completely covered with mucus and blood. He could not
Yeah.
see anything.
I know. It
Then
was really
after
difficult.
suctioning and trying for some time, we could feel something is there on the posterior wall of the trachea.
Okay.
And so when he tried first time, a small piece came into the crocodile forceps. When we saw it, it was a glass piece. Then we became very careful about it.
And then you gave atracurium to
Yes, then I
that.
gave atracurium in the anticipation of a prolonged procedure, as well as no mobility of the child or coughing during. If scoling can cause it, so I said nothing doing. I will give some long acting only.
Time and everything to do everything quietly. Yeah,
Yes.
very nicely managed.
Thank you, madam.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Swapnal has presented very well. I want to thank her and Rajashree both. I just wanted to add one or two things. One thing is preoperative X-ray should be lateral as well as PA view, both. And postoperative also X-ray is a must, especially for ruling out the pneumothorax. And I have some years back, I have encountered a patient with preoperative pneumothorax, wherein we could not, we had to put on spontaneous ICD first and then ventilate the child because it's dangerous. It's like a barotrauma, like a thing, because the foreign body must have been like that valvular kind of foreign body, which leads to barotrauma later on. So preoperative X-ray chest, it's also useful not only for locating the foreign body, pneumonia and all these things, but even pneumothorax also has to be always ruled out. That's all. Thank you, Swapnal and Rajashree.
Thank you.
I call now Dr. Neha here, and Dr. Joyshankar Jana is the moderator for this case. They are going to present the case of cochlear implantation in Jervell and Lange-Nielsen Syndrome.
Yeah, before starting, Dr. Bhatia is also joined in. On behalf of Dr. Bhatia, I welcome all the members, honorable members of IISc Pune City. And it is a proud moment for us that Dr. Sade has won as the president-elect. I congratulate from this platform to him for this fabulous win. And today's discussion, we are going to start about the anesthesia challenges in a patient with Jervell and Lange-Nielsen Syndrome for cochlear implantation. Now, before starting, I'd like to say a few words regarding cochlear implantation. We at KEM Hospital have started cochlear implantation since 2006. And till now, we have crossed more than 600 cochlear implantations. And as you see, all these babies who come with sensorineural deafness has some sort of syndrome. So while doing the PAC, we have to be very careful in ruling out all the other syndromes associated with bilateral sensorineural deafness. And this case which we are presenting, it is really indeed a very hard and difficult anesthesia challenge with a patient with Jervell and Lange-Nielsen syndrome. we have encountered 2 of them in this complete series of 600 cases of cochlear implantation. And this was definitely presented and published as a 2-case presentation in the Indian Journal of Medical Sciences, and indeed a proud moment for all of us. And today we're going to discuss about this anesthesia challenges by Dr. Neha. Yes, Dr. Neha, you can start.
Thank you, sir. Good evening, everybody. Let us first know something about Jervell and Lange-Nielsen or JLN syndrome before starting with our cases. Anton Jervell and Lange-Nielsen, they first described electric conduction defect in the heart called LQTS or long QT syndrome in 1957. It is a rare autosomal recessive disorder. It causes congenital deafness and it causes prolonged QT interval on electrocardiogram. It shows various cardiac arrhythmias, especially polymorphic ventricular tachycardia, also called as torsade de pointes, leading to syncopal episodes and sudden death. It may cause ventricular fibrillation as well. Let us know something about long QT syndrome first. It is a genetic abnormality of ventricular repolarization. It is caused due to mutation in genes encoding cardiac ion channels. There are 2 types. One is dominant Romanov-Watt syndrome. It depends on mutation affecting at least 5 genes encoding sodium and potassium channels, but there is no deafness in this case. Then there is recessive JLNS, which depends on homozygous or compound heterozygous mutations of either one of the 2 genes, that is KCNQ1 or KCNE1. Defect in genes KCNQ1 causes higher risk of arrhythmogenic events. It may be congenital or it may be acquired. It may be acquired due to various drugs or metabolic abnormalities like hypocalcemia, hypomagnesemia. It is sometimes misdiagnosed as epilepsy. The risk increases with consanguineous marriages, and it shows high mortality and morbidity. We use Bazet formula for the calculation of heart rate corrected QT interval, or which we refer to as QTC. It is measured as QT upon square root of RR interval in ECG leads 2 and V5. QTC interval of more than 440 milliseconds is taken as prolonged QTC. The symptoms usually appear in the first year of life in 10% of cases, in the 3rd year of life in 50% of the cases, and by the time the patient is 18 years of age, symptoms appear in almost 90% of the cases. The following are the triggers for cardiac events. 95% cardiac events are caused due to exercise or emotions or crying. Swimming is a very major factor causing cardiac events in 16% of the population. And rest and sleep may also cause cardiac events in 7%. Females are at a lower risk, and the cardiac events are directly proportional to the QTC interval. That is, more the QTC interval, more are the chances of cardiac events. Following treatment options are available, where beta blockers is the therapy of choice. It includes nadolol, metoprolol, propranolol. Propranolol is the treatment of choice amongst beta blockers. We also have an option of implantable cardioverter defibrillator in patients who are symptomatic despite being on beta blockers. Left cervical sympathectomy has been tried in some cases, and if the patients are untreated, in more than 50% of the cases, they may die before the age of 18. What is the treatment of torsade de pointes? Magnesium sulfate is given 30 mg per kg bolus, followed by 2 to 4 mg per kg of infusion. Magnesium sulfate, it is a calcium channel blocker, and it activates the sodium-potassium adenosine triphosphate in the cell membrane, and it promotes the resting repolarization, leading to reduction in the rate of arrhythmias. Cardioversion with 2 joules per kg is required in refractory cases which are not treatable with magnesium sulfate. This is a ECG showing polymorphic ventricular tachycardia. Now let's come to our 2 cases. The first baby was a 2-year-old male baby weighing 9.5 kgs. He was born of non-consanguineous marriage. The patient was asymptomatic, and long QT syndrome was an accidental finding where the QTC interval on the ECG was more than 480 milliseconds. The second baby was a 6-year-old female. She was weighing 16 kgs. She was born of a consanguineous marriage, and she showed history of convulsions, and she was on routine anti-epileptic treatment of sodium valproate. The ECG showed a QTC interval of more than 580 milliseconds. These were the pre-operative investigations that we did for them: hemogram, coagulation profile, urine routine, blood sugar levels, kidney function tests, viral markers like HIV, HBsAg, HCV, cytomegalovirus, and rubella virus. We had their ECG, chest X-ray, and 2D echo done, and serum electrolytes like sodium, potassium, calcium, and magnesium were done. The anesthetic challenges that we see in such patients are usually due to fatal arrhythmias, which are triggered due to their anxiety, crying, or their fear, loud sounds, and all the perioperative stress. Perioperative preparation includes propranolol, which is 1 mg per kg, which is started before and continued on the day of surgery orally. The patient is kept NBM for 2 hours for liquids and 6 hours for solids. Midazolam 0.5 mg per kg was given orally to avoid any sympathetic overactivity due to crying or anxiety. Eutectic mixture of local anesthetics, or EMLA as we call it, was applied on the arm and intravenous line was secured. We used the following monitors during the surgery: pulse oximeter, ECG, which was, we used all the 5 leads, non-invasive blood pressure monitoring, end-tidal carbon dioxide, peripheral nerve stimulator was used, temperature monitoring, and disposable defibrillator pads were applied on the chest anterior posteriorly, and the defibrillator was kept on standby. Anesthesia was induced with fentanyl 2 micrograms per kg, propofol 2 mg per kg, and vecuronium bromide 0.1 mg per kg. Smooth intubation was ensured to avoid any sort of sympathetic stress. Anesthesia was maintained on oxygen, nitrous oxide, and total intravenous anesthesia, that is fentanyl 0.5 microgram per kg per hour as an infusion, and propofol 0.5 to 1 mg per kg per hour as an infusion. Following drugs were given intraoperatively: magnesium sulfate infusion 30 mg per kg over 30 minutes to avoid arrhythmias, cefuroxime 50 mg per kg to avoid otitis media, meningitis, or implant failure, dexamethasone 0.1 mg per kg as an antiemetic, and paracetamol 15 mg per kg was given as an analgesic. Apart from paracetamol, diclofenac suppository 2 mg per kg was given per rectally, and the surgeon was asked to give local infiltration with 0.25% bupivacaine before the skin incision. Post-operatively, no reversal was given in these 2 patients. We waited for spontaneous recovery. Patient was extubated at a TOF count of 4. Post-op monitoring was done in a quiet room, and the defibrillator pads were still attached. The outcome of both the surgeries was uneventful. We avoided the following: perioperative sympathetic overactivity. We avoided any kind of electrolyte imbalance like hypokalemia, hypomagnesemia, hypocalcemia, hypothermia, hypoxia, and hypercarbia, as these things in themselves can cause to arrhythmias. We avoided inhalational agents, ondansetron, anticholinergic, and anticholinesterase, as these are known to increase the QT interval as well. So the take-home message is: pre-op ECG is mandatory for cochlear implant surgery in congenitally deaf patients. Beta blocker is to be continued on the day of surgery. Defibrillator pads, pacing equipment, and injection magnesium sulfate should be kept ready. Adequate pre-medication, perioperative analgesia is to be given, and we have to avoid drugs which cause QT prolongation. Post-operatively, we need a very quiet environment with good post-operative analgesia. Thank you so much.
So Neha has presented very nicely. This is the way we have done it. But prolonged QTC syndrome can be encountered even in babies which are not for even cochlear implant. So what are the red flags? Suppose if you're doing a pediatric baby and there is congenital sensorineural deafness. So you have to ask the history to the baby, to the parents, that the baby has any syncopal attacks. That's the first red flag. First red flag is, of course, sensorineural deafness. Second red flag is history of syncopal attacks and falling unconscious. Third history is that history of any deaths of the previous siblings, sudden deaths in the family. So if you have this history in this pediatric age group, your antennas should go up and should ask for ECG, and a visit on ECG. You can calculate the prolonged QTC with the Bazet's formula, and you must refer to the pediatric cardiologist. because these babies can be a very nightmare, even if you're doing, say, herniatomy or appendicectomy or even minor procedures like dorsal slit or even circumcision. So these are the red flags. You must be very useful and very, very careful about it if you have the patient gives the history of such red flags. So as for the part of the discussion, while examining the baby for congenital sensory neural deafness for cochlear implant, we have to rule out all the following syndromes: congenital rubella syndrome. The other thing which I didn't add was the Treacher-Collins syndrome, Klippel-Feil syndrome, Pendred syndrome, and Alport syndrome. Pendred and Alport are very rare. Very rare. I have still not encountered it yet, but we have encountered these two syndromes of two cases of Jervell and Lange-Nielsen syndrome, which was indeed a nightmare for conducting the anesthesia and going through about it quite safely. So which are the drugs, if the patient is on, can cause prolongation of QT syndrome? So this is a very crowded slide, so I'll take you to the next slide. So these are the various drugs which should be avoided, which can cause prolongation of QT interval. You can see the antibiotics, antifungals, antiprotozoals, antihistaminics, antiarrhythmics, all those things, even organophosphorus poisoning, vasodilators. So these are the various drugs should be avoided, which causes prolonged QT interval. Now, which are the anesthesiologists or anesthetic drugs which can should be avoided, which can cause prolonged QT syndrome? So this slide is taken from the Indian Journal of Anesthesia 2016, which shows the various drugs which can be safely used and should not be used. Say for midazolam can be used, opioid can be used, ketamine never to be used, not to be used. Propofol very little effect, but should not can be used. No inhalational agents, even though isoflurane may be the agent of choice, but should be avoided. Succinylcholine, of course, should be avoided. Vecuronium and atracurium they say there's no effect, but atracurium, if it causes a histamine release, hence better to be avoided, though obviously cis atracurium or cis block can be given, but we don't know how much is the histamine release, though they claim that there is no histamine release. Anticholinesterases and anticholinergics, of course, should be totally avoided. And of course, haloperidol and amiodarone should be avoided. So these are the various anesthetic drugs to be used and not to be used with the patient with prolonged QT syndrome. So indeed, it was a very nice case, and we had this thing to present it and publish it in the peer-reviewed journal, the Journal of Medical Sciences. In 2019, it was accepted as online, and in 2020, it was published on paper. Dr. Rajashree, Godbole, me, and two of our senior-most residents, I should take their names because they had worked hard, Prithviraj and Amol, all assisted us, and we presented this paper and in this peer-reviewed journal. So if there are any other questions for want to conduct this discussion, please you can ask the questions. So we are ready for questions. Pradnya, you can take over.
Joy.
Yeah.
Can I ask one question?
Yes, please. Sorry, sir. Good evening.
Good evening. How the actual accidental ECG finding and the diagnosis of this case was done? What was the reason to do the ECG in 2-year-old case? For what patient had come?
Sir, all patients for cochlear implantation, all patients, all patients who come for PCG.
That means, that means this thing, deafness was diagnosed earlier only.
Deafness was diagnosed after birth. When they do the pediatric checkup, and they find that there is no, so that is the time when they find out that the patient has a sensory neural deafness, and then they confirm it by doing a Beras test, where they confirm that there is sensory neural deafness. So when these babies come for PAC checkup, all the patients undergo ECG because they are usually associated with all sorts of syndrome. Most common is the congenital rubella syndrome or the Down syndrome or the Treacher-Collins or the Klippel-Feil syndrome. They all have cardiac abnormalities along with sensory neural deafness. So you have to do ECG. So ECG has to be properly done in a baby and has to be analyzed with all the angles.
Good, very good.
Thank you, sir.
Joy, I just wanted to ask regarding use of etomidate in pediatric patients.
Etomidate,
these particular cases.
Etomidate, as per the, we searched the material in the net, and there was no mention of using etomidate for this type of prolonged QT syndrome. So we didn't use it. So propofol was there not only in the other Western journals, but even the Indian Journal of Anesthesia, it was mentioned. So we use propofol as an induction agent. But etomidate, we didn't get the literature to be used for this type of syndrome. So we haven't used it.
Okay.
Yes, sir. More questions?
Joy, I
Sure.
must say this is a very nice way of presentation. You know, she presents and then you clarify everything, the discussion part, and take the questions. Nice way of presentation. It was an excellent.
Madam, it is modern technology.
Yes, yes.
Yeah,
Madam,
yeah.
it is
That's
all
right.
all
Yeah.
your blessings, madam. It is all your teachings. We are following all your teachings.
Yeah, I can understand.
Pranam,
modern-
madam. Pranam, madam.
Pranam, pranam, Sale sir.
Yes, madam. Any questions more? So, shall we go to the next, another interesting, very interesting case?
Yes, please.
Yes, thank you. So I invite Dr. Archit Shah and Dr. Shailendra Kanade. This is another very interesting case which we all will enjoy. So let's enjoy it. Okay.
Hello, good evening everyone. I am today presenting the anesthetic management of the placenta percreta with the special reference to the aortic cross clamping to reduce the blood loss during the operation. I am myself a Dr. Archit Shah, DNB anesthesia resident. I am presenting the case under Dr. Shailendra Kanade, my mentor. So first of all, what is the placenta percreta? So placenta percreta comes under the placenta accreta spectrum. Generally, the placenta attached to decidua basalis rare, which allows the separation of the placenta following the normal delivery of the baby. But in this spectrum, in placenta accreta, the first one, the chorionic villi of the placenta will attach the uterine myometrium. Chorionic villi of the placenta will attach the myometrium. In increta, that chorionic villi invades the myometrium, and in placenta percreta, it invades myometrium completely, breach the serosa layer, and adjoins to the following surrounding organs. The most common organs are involved are the bowel, bladder, and the ureter. So, what are the risk factors for developing placenta percreta? So in recent modalities, there is an increased rate of the cesarean sections, patients who are the operative for the myomectomies, and the most important, the increase in trend of the IVF conception. These all factors. So any female is go in the any kind of uterine manipulation surgeries are the increased risk of the placenta percreta. So in our case report, our patient is the 29-year-old female, weight 68 kg, average general build, pregnancy of the 31 weeks. No comorbidities, but diagnosed with the placenta percreta.
Archit, is this the usual gestational age at which you do cesarean section in placenta percreta?
In the placenta percreta, generally cesarean section we have to perform, but it is performed after 33 weeks, at the 34 or the 35 weeks when the fetal lung maturity was happened. But in our case, the patient has the history of the PV spotting and the PV bleeding 7 days ago, which managed conservatively, but following that, our patient has the surgical history of the in first pregnancy. There is an intrauterine fetal death at 17 weeks. For that, the DNA did not done, and is also myomectomy done for the large fibroid. So in the MRI report, it is clearly shown that placenta had invaded the myometrium completely and has reached up to the uterine serosa. So there is a high risk if we are wait for more time, and there is a more and more chance of the bleeding and hemorrhage. So we planned the cesarean section as per gynecologist's opinion at 31 weeks. So this is the intraoperative figure which shows the extent of the invasion up to the ureteric serosa. So after the planning the cesarean section at 31 weeks, the pre-anesthetic checkup was done. Patient was normal. We are planning the cesarean section is 31 weeks. As per gynecologist and our advice, the antenatal steroids, IM beta-methoxazone, 12 mg, 12 hours apart, 2 doses given for increase the fetal lung maturity, and after that 1 week we plan for the cesarean section. The concern is the major blood loss. So we are ready with the adequate blood and blood products. We inform the blood bank, and we advise the standard return inform concern, high risk concern, and NBM for the 6 hours. So, but as per most important, all the basic investigations are done. The main investigation which we are also interested is the hemoglobin. The hemoglobin of the patient was the 12.2 and we anticipate the major blood loss. So we count the maximum allowable blood loss. The maximum allowable blood loss was the 2 into blood volume, starting hemoglobin minus allowable hemoglobin divided by starting plus allowable. For this formula, we count the 943 ml was the maximum allowable blood loss. So this much blood loss was allowable, but we know there is a much blood loss. So we have to ready according that. Other reports are the normal, RFTs are normal, INR is also okay, all serology is negative, ECG also okay.
And all others mute their mics, please.
What are the challenges for you are expecting in these kind of surgeries?
So placenta percreta itself is a nightmare for the surgeon, also for the anesthetic. The most challenge is the anticipate massive blood loss. Because of the blood loss, we are suspecting the great level of the hemodynamic instability, and the major challenge is the vital organ perfusion. For that, we have to also come with the massive blood transfusion, but it has also their complication like DIC, pulmonary embolism, and ARDS. In our case, the massive blood transfusion has a definition like we have to infuse the 10 unit of the packed red blood cells in 24 hours, or the more than 3 units of the packed red blood cells in the 3 hours. That is we accept in our case. So it's a massive blood transfusion. So we have to be ready for that complication also. But before that, we have to must know what is the surgical plan. So surgeon plan the classic upper segment cesarean section, followed by the temporary infrarenal aortic clamping to reduce the blood loss during the hysterectomy, and followed by the peripartal hysterectomy.
Then what is your plan of anesthesia for this patient?
So generally we have two options, general and the regional anesthesia. But we prefer the general anesthesia because in general anesthesia, it provides the much hemodynamic stability at compared to the regional anesthesia, and general anesthesia also provide the better ventilation control. The only disadvantage of using general anesthesia is that there is some anesthetic agent exposure to fetus. So we have avoided that anesthetic agents and we are go with the general anesthesia. If we use the regional anesthesia, in regional anesthesia, there is a major drawback is the hemodynamic instability. If the case prolonged more than 3 to 4 hours, we have to need the convert into general anesthesia. So that leads that time of the confused vitals. Patient is not in a good state to provide general anesthesia. So at that time there is a providing intubation, and that all become very difficult. So and there is it's a very major going operation. So patient also become restlessness, anxious. So we go with the general anesthesia.
And in this case, the incision was supra-umbilical vertical incision.
So not the surgical relaxation.
Cesarean section of lower segment cesarean section.
So with only regional anesthesia, there is not also good surgical relaxation. So we prefer general anesthesia. For preparation of the anesthesia, we have to ready with the multidisciplinary team approach. We at least need a gynecologist, anesthesiologist, neonatologist, urologist, and the vascular surgeon also stand by if there is a major vascular event happen. We have to ready with the airway management trolley with the all equipments of the difficult intubation. As there is a maximum allowable blood loss is 940 ml. If much more blood was opened, we have to ready with at least 4 PCV, 4 FFP units. Hotline fluid warmer, we have to transfuse the fluid via that to maintain the core temperature of the body. Emergency drug, if too much BP loss, we have to ready with the vasopressors like dobutamine, NORAD, pressure wave for rapid infusion, central lines, large bore intracath, arterial line also for maintaining of the continuous invasive BP monitoring, infusion set if we need the infusion of some vasopressors, and defibrillator as a standby. Now to perform general anesthesia, we put 16 and 18 gauge intracath or standard monitor applied after the induction of the anesthesia done, and after the induction of anesthesia, arterial line also performed to continuous invasive BP monitoring. Urinary catheter is done and urine output measurement also taken. Hotline fluid warmer primed with the lingual lactate to preload the patient and maintain the BP during the starting part of the anesthesia. As a pre-medication, we given tablet pantoprazole 40 mg a night before. All antibiotic prophylaxis given 30 minutes before the OT. Injection glycopyrrolate ondansetron also given. Followed by that, injection propofol 100 mg and succinylcholine 100 mg, and rapid sequence intubation, smooth intubation with cuff endotracheal 7 number tube is done. After that, once the effect of the succinylcholine is decreasing, we giving the muscle relaxation with the intermediate dose of the injection atracurium. At this time, before the delivery of the baby, the nitric oxide and the injection fentanyl was the avoided, because they both have the risk of the neonatal respiratory depression that leads to fetal distress. So we avoid that drug, sir. Okay. For maintenance of the anesthesia, 100% of the O2 and sevoflurane was given. After the delivery of the baby, nitrous oxide and injection fentanyl also given. Patient on control ventilation, muscle relaxation provided by the intermediate atracurium. At that,
so you have written that you avoided uterotonics after the delivery of baby. Any particular reason for that?
Sir, uterotonics generally we given after in normal cesarean section. It allowed the separation of the placenta and contract the uterus. But in our case, if we allow the separation of placenta, there is more and more bleeding, and there is a increased hemorrhage, and there is a postpartum hemorrhage. So we avoid uterotonics, because surgeon also performing peripartum hysterectomy. So we avoid uterotonics. So baby status, baby's weight is 2.1 kg. Baby cried immediately. Apgar source was 7 at 1 minute, 8 at the 5 minute, and patient shifted to the NICU for the further care. In intra-op monitoring, we standardize monitor ECG, SpO2, NIBP, invasive BP monitoring, ETCO2 monitoring, temperature monitoring, because we are giving fluid via hot line. So maintain the core temperature, and we also use the warming mattress also. ABG is also taken, pre-aortic clamp and post-aortic clamp, and urine output measurement also taken. In intraoperative course, the operation to run through the 4 hours. The aortic clamping time is just 30 minutes, because there is no much extension of the placenta. The blood loss is the 1.2 liters. From that 940 is the allowable blood loss. So we transfuse 1 PCV and 2 FFP as per the protocol. And if there is a event when there is a slightly decrease in BP trend, that time we give an injection 1 unit of volume to maintain the intravascular volume and maintain the BP. The pre and post aortic clamping ABG taken and correction given accordingly. Patient remain vitally stable. Urine output was 450 cc for the 4 hours. That is also good. The core body temperature is maintained 36 to 30 degrees Celsius. Post aortic clamps release, we done the serum CPK level measurement, that is 48, but up to normal limit is 145 in the female.
Why do you check for serum CPK levels?
Because there is a aortic clamping was done. So there is a high risk of the hypoxemia, muscle ischemia, and cardiac ischemia, but we have done the serum CPK level that is within normal limit 48. So there is no significant muscle ischemia. So we avoid the proper CKMB, the cardiac markers level.
CKMB is not expected to rise.
Yes.
It is the plain CPK, which is skeletal muscle, because we are interested in skeletal muscle ischemia of lower limbs. That's why we did CPK level and not CPKMB.
This is the ABG analysis. There is a pre-aortic close clamping pH and the post-aortic. All the patients remain metabolically very stable. There is a mild acidosis. This is acceptable. That is physiological. So we didn't given anything for that. And calcium also remain normal. There is an increase in lactate, but that is obvious and acceptable.
Lactate was also within normal limits. So as the cross clamping time was within limits 30 minutes, so we did not, there were not much of hemodynamic instability, and we could get away with without treating for calcium replacement or a soda bicarb like this.
So for analgesia, intraoperatively we given standard Dynapar, Tramadol, and paracetamol. But post-operative pain relief is much more important to increase the patient comfort. So we given 4-quadrant USG guided TAP block, 15 cc, 0.2% ropiacaine plus 2 mg dexamethasone to increase the duration of that particular block in each quadrant. So we given this much post-operative period.
Could have you given pre-operatively epidural and then general anesthesia for this patient?
Sir, we avoided the epidural thing just because there is a first of all epidural leads to sympathetic blockage and it worsens the hemodynamic stable. stability of the person. Plus, there is a risk of the massive blood loss, and we transfuse the blood, so there is a massive blood transfusion also. So there is a risk of the patient's coagulation profile is dearranged, and there is a risk of the epidural hematoma. So we avoided, and also surgeon was going to perform aortic cross clamping. So that is a risk of the spinal ischemia also. Although that is an infrarenal, so that is not a big thing, but still we avoided epidural.
In our case, it is infrarenal aortic cross clamping, in which case aortic, spinal ischemia is less likely, because most of the lumbar vessels are above the level that we are taking, but still that is a small possibility, and we have to be aware of that.
Yes. After that, all operative history, at the end of the patient surgery, patient core temperature was maintained, patient was vitally stable, patient was reversed and extubated on table, and patient remained stable. Patient's pain relief is also good because of the tap block, and patient shifted to intensive care unit for the monitoring purpose. On post-op, we go to for 24 hours. We maintain the patient's stable. Patient is okay. Hemogram also done. Hemoglobin is 10. And platelet is 1,96,000. So patient is okay. So we are happy with our anesthesia. Okay.
We have, gynecologist Dr. V.M. Joshi is doing this kind of surgeries in our institute, and he has recently presented a series of 15 cases with aortic placenta percreta with aortic cross clamping in May in Journal of Obstetrics and Gynecology, which is a peer-reviewed journal. And in those cases, it was average blood loss was from 650 ml to 1900 ml, depending on the case of severity of placenta percreta. And none of the cases required more than 4 weeks. Okay.
There is a question from Bhaskar Shedolekar. He wants you to elaborate more on the aortic cross clamping.
We, after delivery of baby, and the cord is clamped just above the placenta, and suturing of uterus is done in single layer to avoid hemorrhage from the edges. And then they bring out the uterus, and behind, just above the promontory, there is aorta is dissected, and the laterally there is inferior vena cava, and but posteriorly they avoid dissection because the fourth lumbar artery is usually there, and so snoop is not done, but to avoid damage to the fourth lumbar artery and ischemia to the spinal cord. But they use Debaki clamp, which is applied, and then we check when they first do the dissection, make the bed ready for aortic cross clamping. The trial run of aortic cross clamping is done, check, and then we check for the peripheral pulses, dorsalis pedis. You can also, and a pulse oximeter is applied to toes also, so we can see the loss of waveform of plethysmograph, and you can also do femoral artery Doppler. And so after confirming that there is adequate clamping of aorta, then we proceed with the surgery. We release the clamp. We don't keep the start the clamping from the beginning. We do the infundibular pelvic ligaments and then clamp those. The initial clamps are did without aortic cross clamping, so as to limit the cross clamping time. And after they reach the area of where the placenta has invaded the thing, that dissection is done under aortic cross clamping, because there is neovascularization and there are major vessels, new vessels, which and they can cause much tremendous bleeding. And once the each and every vessel is tied and cut separately, and they use most of the times vessel sealants like ligashore. And we have to keep one on the peripheral pulses. The pulse oximeter is always there on this, so that to know there is no accidental dislodgement of aortic clamp also. And during aortic clamping, although we are maintaining normothermia in patients, we avoid active rewarming in lower limbs, and when there is ischemia time, to avoid increased metabolism and oxygen demand in lower limbs. And once you release the cross clamp, there is a flow of metabolites, non-aerobic metabolites, and that can cause hypotension. That is why we are using continuous intra-arterial blood pressure monitoring. And if required, we can use vasopressors, but usually we don't need, as the aortic cross clamping time is limited.
Are you happy, Bhaskar?
Can I speak?
Yes,
Yeah.
yes, of course.
See, we've been doing this cross clamping in KEM Hospital for a fairly long time, and we have achieved perfection after a lot of cases have been done. There have been times when I have anesthetized with senior gynecologists in KEM only, with cross clamping done, and yet the blood loss was massive. At the end of the surgery, my question was, what did you achieve by doing cross clamping? Because you've given 7 units of blood to this patient. Then with the help of the surgeons
One
also,
unit,
I would need
one unit, sir.
One unit.
One
Sir,
unit.
only 1 unit of blood.
One
Okay,
unit of
so
blood.
can I speak? No. With the help of Dr. Bhalerao, the cross clamping technique was perfected. Okay, and it's only after that now that the blood loss has been brought to the limits that Dr. Archit mentioned. Otherwise, even with cross clamping, the blood loss used to be massive. So that means there was a technical aspect to the cross clamping, which only the surgeon could perfect now. Now they've reached the perfection.
Also, Bhaskar has asked, who does the cross clamping? At
Now
in
the-
our hospital, the gynecologist does the cross clamping.
It is the surgeries, Dr. VM Joshi and neurosurgeon are there operating, and they perform cross clamping themselves, but vascular surgeon is on standby always.
Yeah.
And
So-
now there is yes.
Yeah.
You want
Yes.
to say something?
Yeah, so only an experienced person now, whether he's a vascular surgeon or an experienced general surgeon, I mentioned Dr. Bhalerao's name here. So now sort of, even a gynecologist can do it if they've gone through a couple of procedures like that.
And there is a question from Poonam. What about anti-emetic?
Anti-emetic.
Anti-emetic.
Yes.
We give
Poonam, you asked about this case or some previous case?
Anti-emetic was for the previous case for the prolonged.
Yes, okay, okay. So maybe it was given. Yeah.
I was worried about ondansetron. That why I asked. Yes.
Poonam, can you see me now? Poonam?
Yes, I can see you.
Yeah, Poonam, ondansetron is to be totally avoided in cases of prolonged QT syndrome.
Yeah, that's what I thought. I missed the part.
It is totally avoided because it is mentioned in the text and literature. So the most potent antiemetic which we gave was dexamethasone.
Dexamethasone, right?
Yeah, it was mentioned.
And also for this case, Poonam has asked, she's written excellent case presentation. Is there any scope of preoperative uterine artery embolization in such
Yes,
cases to
yes.
reduce the intraoperative blood loss?
Was going to come there. Archit, can you explain
Yes.
what are the other modalities which can reduce the blood loss, intraoperative blood loss?
So, ma'am, this is a total spectrum. In placenta, accreta and increta, the uterine artery clamping by the 2 methods, either the embolization, either the balloon occlusion was performed. But after seeing the generals and the cases presentation and experience, they said only uterine artery embolization or clamping doesn't provide that much blood control, because in accreta and increta there is only uterine supply, but in every percreta cases there is an extra uterine collateral formation. So about or after the deuterian artery, they have surgeons and either gynecologist or surgeon perform the internal bilateral iliac artery ligation. Same method, either embolization, either there is a balloon occlusion. But they perform mostly internal iliac artery ligation, but still they don't found that much amount of the blood loss controlling. For that, the ultimate option is the aorta. For aortic blood loss control, we have only two options. The first one is the resuscitative endovascular aortic balloon occlusion. For that, we have to first put the balloon in the cath lab. Then we have to shift the patient in the main OT. In between, there is a chance of the balloon migration, balloon rupture, balloon dislodge. So this all increase the very high modality. And if the balloon is inside the OT, if balloon pressure remains more, then that is a chance of the ischemia, free radical injury, fluid shift damage. So there are more chances of and more modality. As this compared to all these methods, the aortic cross clamping give the excellent results. So, and that is also published and accepted by all the journals. So in now time, there is a aortic cross clamping in the naked eye. It's the best procedure to control the blood loss.
Okay, Pradnya is asking the duration of cross clamping that you will allow.
So we can allow up to 120 minutes of aortic cross clamping. Up to 120 minutes, the maximum.
This is infrarenal.
In suprarenal, there is a 90 minutes. In infrarenal, there is a 120 minutes. Because with the increasing time, there is a free radical injury, there is a ischemia, general hypoxemia, there is a fluid shift. So that all leads to metabolic imbalance, and that deteriorates the patient's general condition. So 120 minutes in infrarenal and 90 minutes in suprarenal aortic clamping is the maximum allowable time.
Thank you.
Can I ask a question about the foreign body?
Yes, sir.
Yes, sir.
So, see, you all spoke of a situation where you had relaxants, you had Sanders injector. Okay, you had all the equipment to remove the foreign body. A foreign body can occur anywhere, anytime, in any place. So let us say that we experience people with all this equipment land up with a situation where Sanders injector is not there. Okay. And maybe sometimes even the basic minimal anesthetic thing is not there. Will you let the child die, or what will you do from your experience to do it with the most minimal equipment? This is something that doesn't always land up in KEM Hospital or Ruby Hall or something. It can be, foreign bodies are there more probably in peripheral areas and villages than probably in metropolitan areas here. So can you sort of spell out your mind as to what you will do?
So the baby can always be ventilated with JR circuit,
Okay.
IPPR. So that is most of the places it is available, even if Sanders injector is not available.
Okay. So you will manage it just with the JR circuit, am I right?
Yes,
And
sir,
give
that
it
is the only
intermittently to
acceptable method right now. People are objecting now for Sanders injector. Jet ventilation is going out of this thing, fashion. Now IPPR and side down with JR circuit is acceptable method of ventilation for bronchoscopy.
Would it be possible, I mean, I'm just saying this, to do it in spontaneous ventilation?
The people do with spontaneous ventilation. People used to do, but with better drugs now, we are preferring muscle relaxants.
What I'm saying is, if you're caught up in a tight spot, that's what I'm saying. And this can occur anywhere in the smallest of hospital. A child can be brought with the foreign body. And so, is it possible to do it? What technique?
But immobility cannot be guaranteed.
Sir, see, when you do, whenever you do patient with spontaneous ventilation, there is no immobility. The surgeon will be struggling. The baby may move, and the foreign bodies are continuously moving.
Okay, I'll just tell you.
All these challenges are there. If you don't means make the baby immobile.
Okay, I'll just tell you, in a place like Bombay Hospital. Okay, now this is not a small hospital, it's one of the leading hospitals at that time when I was a resident. Okay, so what they used to do, the pediatric surgeons, like we have Dr. Datta, and foreign bodies used to come. So they used to take the patient, I used to take the patient deep under ether anesthesia in Bombay Hospital, where bypass surgery was done at the same time in the adjacent theater. Deep under ether anesthesia, put a laryngoscope, spray the cords, supra and infralaryngeal with that time 4% xylocaine. I don't think 10% was there and 15% was there. And then after taking the patient deep under anesthesia for 15-20 minutes, the baby was handed over to the surgeon to do whatever he wants to retrieve the foreign body. Now that
But
was
the time that ether gives, we don't get with the newer inhalation agents.
so this
Sir,
is,
and now the time has changed. Good drugs
I've
are
gone through.
available.
What
Good
I'm saying
equipment
is,
is available.
in the adjacent theater, I used to do bypass anesthesia, cardiac bypass. And the pediatric surgeon in a small theater used to struggle with this technique. In Ruby Hall, I'm giving you a second example. In Ruby Hall, okay, the bronchoscope was put, and because the bulb was loose, the bronchoscope bulb became another second foreign body.
Foreign body. Yes, yes.
It's always nice to listen to all these stories. I think.
And now I shouldn't be. The surgeon was a cardiac surgeon. His name was Dr. I think Bhate. So I have gone through all these things and all. So now things are simplified. It may be a high risk anesthesia, but they are definitely simplified. Thank you.
Definitely. Thank you, sir.
Okay, thank you, sir.
Thank you.
I just wanted to ask Shailendra one thing. Can you manage these percreta patients without hysterectomy?
Yes, we can, but the decision is of
the surgeon. Yes.
But there is alternative method, a conservative method of managing placenta percreta, where the placenta is left in situ after cutting the cord, and some medical management was given, and it can be shed out in over a period of say months, 1 month to 6 months.
Okay.
And that is, but the possibility of bleeding even after any time before completely shedding out the placenta remains there, and that can cause emergencies also. The other thing can be it can be excised totally if we want to conserve the uterus.
Yes.
It can be excised completely, and repaired. The uterus rent is repaired surgically. That can also be done.
Thank you, Shailendra.
Thank you.
Yeah, I think Poonam, do you want to add anything?
Hello, Saroj.
Yes, madam.
Yeah, I want to tell Shailendra, you did it very well in a planned manner. About 15 years back, we lost one patient because of this neovascularization with bladder. We just couldn't control the bleeding and we lost the young patient. So this was managed very well.
From you is very
It's cherry on the cake,
We
Thanks.
only talk about our successes, our failures we don't.
Don't discuss.
You should be bold enough to talk about our failures also.
Yeah.
Yes. Okay. Thanks all. Thanks,
Thank you.
Dr. Sare
It's
and
been a-
everyone for joining in. And thanks for
Thank
making
you.
this
Thank you.
activity a nice, successful activity. Yes, Joy wants to say something.
Yeah, Joy, bolo.
Sare sir, welcome you. If you want to make a small little thing about your victory, you can unmute yourself.
Sare sir, bolo.
Sare sir. Unmute.
Sir,
Sir,
unmute.
unmute karo na.
We'll unmute.
Unmute kara.
Thank you so much, Joy. Thank you so much for giving me the opportunity. Actually, the election, the way in which it happened all together, all of you people have worked so much. So I was really overwhelmed, and it was astonishing. And the ultimate result, what we got was like a clean sweep with so much of margin. It's all because of all you people did it. And of course, this was altogether a different experience. Altogether different experience, I'll say. In Maharashtra, which has never happened. Bhatia sir will also agree with this. This type of election, so much of digital, so much of media and all, everything. Surprisingly, Pune voting was excellent, I will say. almost we reached nearly more than 90% of the voting we did. Whatever this thing, eligible voters were there from Pune. That was the great achievement. And we need to maintain this. And second thing, we need to take a drive for the making the members active, and more addition of the new members. That of course will be taking the in the executive committee meeting. Pradnya has already declared probably next week 7th of this thing executive committee meeting is planned. That time certain decisions will be taken. You people will be there.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you so much.
Over to Pradnya. Pradnya, you're on.
Yes. First of all, I would like to thank Bhatia sir for your inputs. It was really nice to have you on the forum.
It's my pleasure. I still love to. I will continue to. Many of you will probably not be there, but I will still be there.
Yes, sir. We would love you to be around.
Yeah.
Thank you, Sari sir. Thank you, Joshi madam.
I must say.
Now, I would like to, it was a wonderful presentation by Swapnal and Rajesh and Dr. Rajashree.
Saleh sir.
One of the kind, definitely.
Saleh sir, both the Bandes, Bande sir in your hospital and Mrs. Bande in KEM Hospital have done a fantastic job to make you win.
Yeah, thank you so much. The second thing, Dr. Pradnya.
Yes.
Thank you so much. And this one thing I get little bit, in spite of webinar also, our attendance is very low in Pune city.
So
what we can make for this?
Yeah, we make the scientific program should be strong, and they will come. They will come.
Yeah, these cases, today's cases were excellent cases.
Very good.
Rare cases, but people should know because foreign bodies are the most common, most common, and always it is an emergency. So people should attend this. What exactly the things go, because every now and then people face the problem for the, forget about the institute. You have all the gadgets there and you can do it, but the people who are at the nursing home level, and I have witnessed one patient, the kid dying in front of me.
Sir, this is also live streaming on the Anaesthesia TV. So a lot of people who don't attend the webinar will later be looking at it at the Anaesthesia TV.
So technically the things have become so easy. It is not, at least this type of cases which they came across, even there is no time to refer from one place to another place sometimes.
Okay. Saleh sir, we have made you the boss of Maharashtra state, but you owe us a tremendous responsibility now.
Yeah, thank you so much, sir. Yeah, I'll try to fulfill that with your all guidance and all.
Something that the Indian society has not been able to do, we expect you to do.
Yes, sir. We'll try to.
Now, you are the head of an institution. You are at the administrative level also.
Yeah.
So you can, the change that you bring about in your hospital will spread in other hospitals in Pune.
Yeah, we'll try to make it. Definitely.
Thank you.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much.
So, can we close the meeting now, sir?
And the wonderful presentations. Thank you, Rahul, Joy, and Rajashree, and Dr. Kanade. Another, I would like to thank Mr. Kulkarni and the Maharashtra State Chapter of IIC for giving us the Zoom platform, and also Mr. Rahul Choube, because he has he is the parcel for doing this presentation on Anaesthesia TV, which is live streaming now. And many people around the world, they are watching this particular program. We will know the count later on, sir. Sorry, sir. So you will know how many people have actually seen the webinar.
Okay.
Yes, sir.
Okay. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you so much.
We leave. Thank you. Thank you, everyone.